the idea is that when we're trying to measure performance, we think of, well, if they're constantly working during the day, that's a successful measurement of performance, regardless of what they're actually accomplishing. If they look like they're working, then that's how me as a manager assumes that they're doing good work. But that really ends up being, almost reinforcing, like you say, the idea of being busy, of just looking like providing that productivity theater, having the look of productivity rather than the actual results of it. And a good example of that was we used to do a lot of, again, like, pre-COVID, we did a lot of in-person meetings and discussions and sessions with different business groups. I remember we were given this talk about this idea around, about performance management and busy and productive. And a lot of businesses say, oh no, we really focus on productivity. It's in our mission statement, our values. We're a productivity focused business. And then we had one client participant talking about their experience in their production facility. And they're talking about, like, how, they are very much about, like, outcome focused and that sort of thing like that. And then he made a couple comments about, like, hours and shift. They had, the idea of producing, like, I think it was like 10 tons per 8-hour shift was kind of how they talked about that. So I remember we kind of stopped and dug into that a little bit more. And we said, okay, just not to pick on you, but we just kind of want to explore this kind of how it plays out, in the everyday, and say, so if the performance outcome is an 8-hour shift, your team has to complete 10 tons of the outputs. So we said, okay, what about this? What if your team could produce 10 tons in 6 hours? What would you do then? And say, well, we expect them to try and achieve 12 tons in 6 hours if they met that. Like, keep the good work going. We're like, okay, what if your team said to you, hey, if we do 10 tons in 6 hours, can we go home early? And he was like, well, if they did that, I'd say, okay, sure, but we're only paying you for the 6 hours. We're not paying you for the full 8. And to us, that really spoke to the heart of it. And a lot of the other participants kind of saw our point that he unintentionally made for us, that what that expectation does is it creates this idea where employees, if they want to get their full day's pay and do the least amount of work, make the 10 tons last 8 hours.
Yeah, I mean, and it makes sense, right? I mean, what incentive are you actually providing to people? The incentive is, we're not going to get any more money, regardless of how hard we work. We're not going to get any more time off, regardless of how hard we work. Mm-hmm. So you're incentivizing people to take as long as possible to do as much work as they should, mm-hmm. To take that full 8 hours, so that they're not killing themselves. Why would they work harder? Why would anybody push to produce more than the bare minimum if you're not providing any form of incentive for them to do so?
Yeah, like if like this wasn't a client that we work with, so we didn't really get a chance to go beyond this conversation. But if this had been a client, we would have explored ideas around performance management, like saying, to help improve kind of the factors of your workplace and improve things like, wellness, or improving like compensation, or those kinds of things. Like, could you look at more ways or more options, provided you had the operational flexibility to? Could you have, pay people for an 8-hour shift, but once they complete their quota, then they go home? Or could you look at, like, a week's worth of quota? So, if it's 50 tons, if they did 50 tons potentially by Thursday, could they have Friday off? Like those types of,
or half day on Friday, or are performance incentives of shift premiums of if you've got 5 8-hour shifts, you're supposed to do 10 tons. If you do 50, great. If you do 60, then you get some sort of incentive, right? If you actually want to encourage performance, and you believe that you are incentivizing performance, then you need to actually put your money where your mouth is, either literal dollars or mm-hmm. creating some sort of benefit for people to work harder.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but if the goal is, we measure performance by how much they're working during their shift, regardless of their output, or as long as they meet their output, then the idea is, again, you're reinforcing busy rather than productive. And this and again, that's a nice example for the manufacturing, or for like, some of the more non-desk work piece. But when you look at things like, like desk work from home has had this massive productivity theater component to it as well, right? Like I did a video about productivity paranoia where I talked about, like, one of the problems that we're having is that people are actually being very productive in remote work or work from home, but a lot of managers don't know what that looks like, or they don't know or how do they ensure that their employees are actually being productive. So they use time measuring, keystroke measuring kind of pieces to try and validate the performance, rather than shifting to kind of the results and the outcomes. So we have this productivity paranoia from managers worried about, what does performance look like when I can't see you every day? So if they don't actually have an effective way to measure results and outcomes, then you have employees doing productivity theater where they have to make it look like they're working despite the fact of what they're actually accomplishing, because the results and their outcomes are not enough to prove they're working. And this is kind of the stuff that we have to do when performative expectations are so ingrained in our workplace culture, because that really does create a lot of damage.
It does. And I mean, it's always, I find it so amusing that that topic comes up around work from home, when there is as much or more theater happening in the office of people just sitting at their desks, looking like they are busy, and not like, it's just, this happens everywhere. And it all comes down to, what are you reinforcing and how are you reinforcing it? How are you incentivizing people to perform, to have good performance, not just put on a performance?